Peace, peace, peace. What it is, it's your brother Tyvon Swainell, aka the Orthodox Moore, aka Brother Moore. It's been a long time, family, but I'm pleased to bring to you a late night conversation with some really cool and interesting people, the Hebrew of Israel and Abu. We're about to have a freestyle session. It got pushed back a little bit because my man Ibri had to wash a stack of dishes a mile high right quick, you know what I'm saying? But you know what I'm saying? At least he gets some done. You know what I'm saying? At least he gets some done. I was late to find out that I would be hosting this thing, but I'm happy to find out I'll be hosting this thing because I will definitely make sure this is an interesting conversation for the family. But real quick, I'm going to turn the mic over to Ibri and let him introduce himself to the people and also Abu. And let them start off by whatever topic they want to bring up in terms of what they feel is what's most interesting for the time right now. But go ahead, Ibri, you got the floor.
All right, shalom, everyone. Shalom. I just want to thank the host for letting me on, the Orthodox Moore, and I am the Hebrew of Israel. And basically, I just teach, or really, should I say, I compile information together through my research of history, language, DNA, and try to give it out to the people, give them a model of mine when it comes to the ancient human populations, and connecting them, of course, to biblical people that we read about in the Torah and the Bible. So, yeah.
Go ahead, you got the floor.
All right. No, I don't have much to say. Just that I guess some people are familiar with me. I'm Abu Hamad, and I have I guess a mild amateur interest in in genetics and how it relates to various attempts to apply a patrilineal definition of Israelite to modern populations, and what the explorations of that intellectual puzzle can look like. And so and I've been fascinated since last August. So what are we now closing in on? I don't know, forgive me, like 9 months that I've been familiar with the group that Ivry's associated with, the Yaaap gang. And so it's good to finally have a discussion on YouTube. I think we've had some very brief exchanges on Clubhouse, and then of course I've corresponded with them on Facebook. So it's good to have a conversation on YouTube, and looking forward to anyone else who might join. And that's all.
Yeah, they're both being far too kind, so I'm gonna go in reverse order. So Abu, oh, that's what's up. We got Sean jumping on, right? Yeah, what's good, Sean? Go in reverse order. So Abu, oh, that's there you go. You gotta turn this off in the back. Well, yeah. So Abu is the Hebrew Israelite historian of the game, right? He probably knows more than anybody about the history of like Hebrew Israelism in America. And when you hear a lot of people cite a lot of information, you're going to hear them using Abu as their phone because more than anybody about the history of like. I'm gonna mute right quick, Sean, because you still got to get us correct in the background. But yeah, Abu is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to that, and we'll be diving into that in this conversation. And you've also seen him on this channel and on Debate Talk for You, talking about historical stuff and genetic stuff with me. We were getting into Gedmatch stuff, etc. And we're probably going to jump into that one first. And Ibri is someone who's been working really hard and diligent on a scientific model that's consistent with the Table of Nations in the Bible, and making the Bible look really realistic for people and be able to trace peoples and lineages, etc. And is a debate you anytime, any place, anywhere kind of person when it comes to the information. And he has a lot of standing challenges and a lot of there's a lot of wolf chickens being sold. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people sound like they want to debate, but when Ibri steps up, they kind of run off. You know what I'm saying? So shout out and respect to the people who've actually debated him, whether respectfully or not respectfully, the people who've actually stepped in the ring with him. But yeah, that's that right there. And real quick, Sean, please go ahead and introduce yourself. You know what I'm saying? Another member of the Yaaap gang. Yeah.
Shalom, fam. Yaaap. What's going on, fam? Sean Harris. You know me on Facebook as Saya Harris. I'm a Israelite, Hebrew Israelite. Member again, a member of the Yaaap gang. We came together to just basically elucidate information that through data mining to just give a stronger argument to our claims of being Israel. That's basically it for now.
Sean Harris, aka the Scholastic Leather Slapper, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. But I'm gonna start this one off on a conversation that I was seeing on Facebook recently, having to do with Gedmatch or whatnot. And it's a conversation that me and Abu have touched on a little bit on this channel. So I think my viewers will be familiar with the content. And there was supposed to be a debate between Sister Salam and a Sister Shari ANAYAH. So real quick, Ibri and Sean, can y'all break down the background of that or no?
That debate is actually, well, I shouldn't say debate now. That discussion is actually on. It's still on.
Really?
Okay. Yeah. And I see Shari's in the chat. Maybe she can come up and explain it, but they are going to have that discussion. I think next week is going to be very soon. But
so it went from a debate to no debate to now we're going to have a discussion. If I understand correctly.
Yes, she doesn't really want to do a debate, and so we're not going to call it that. We're just going to call it a kind of like what we're doing now, just a discussion. We'll see if it evolves into a debate, but it's supposed to be a discussion.
Okay, I've been a little bit out the loop and whatnot, so I'm going to narrate what I believe Salam's position is, and then I'll let y'all break down what Shari's position is. I mean, Shari, if you want to jump on, please. Hold on, the link. Let me drop it one more time. One more time. You can definitely come through and articulate your position, but from what I understand, because I've interacted with Sister Salam on a bunch of occasions prior to this, privately, publicly, etc. I mean, from what I understand, her position is that people of African American descent will not come up as Ethiopian Jewish in the Ethio Helix projects in Gedmatch, and that African Americans using Gedmatch through the MDLP projects are using it incorrectly in terms of trying to connect themselves to Jews. Is that your guys' understanding of her position or
no? Yes, I believe that's it. That we use the wrong calculators when it comes to using Gedmatch, and there's particular calculators that African Americans are supposed to use based on their their mixed genetic ancestry that we typically have, and that, yeah, I think it does have to do with something like we wouldn't come up with Ethiopian Jewish, and with Ethiopian Jewish.
So that being said,
if I may, something we discussed last August, you and I.
Yep, I was just gonna go into you.
Okay,
go ahead. You floor. No, you have the floor. Go ahead.
What I was gonna say, as far as Gedmatch, I think one thing that definitely is needed in those conversations is a clarification about each participant's model, because something we were discussing back in August, it was early August, you and I had that discussion on your channel. Even I can land like an Ethiopian Jewish hit on some of the various calculators on Gedmatch, but let's say if we're running with a patrilineal definition of Israelite, then I have an R haplogroup as my paternal haplogroup. So then if you're running with a patrilineal definition, I could be an example of how getting Ethiopian Jew in a Gedmatch result, specifically an Oracle result, could be irrelevant depending on the model that you're running with, or the definition, excuse me. So I think that's an important talking point when people are discussing Gedmatch, is like, what exactly are they looking for? And if they're discussing, Israelite identities, what's the definition that they would run with?
Yeah, for instance, I think we peace and weapons. No, you're good. Yeah, for instance, I think we were talking about, for example, so you have Filipino descent in your ancestry, and in the Ethio Helixes, it was showing up as Japanese, correct?
Yeah, that's also another question. Like when a particular calculator is limited, I remember I saw a blog that described it as it has to throw your genetic material, your admixture, somewhere. And so if it's limited, you get these sort of interesting designations. I suspect that's what's going on with that calculator that gives a Natufian hit, because, you know, as you know, I got like 34% on that calculator that gives a Natufian reading, or whatever you want to call it. And of course, you know, the idea of me being 34% Natufian is like preposterous, because it would imply that, like, you know, one of my grandparents was like somehow this pure blood Natufian that made it all the way through history. So there is also, and the same thing with Filipino getting thrown into a Japanese calculator, and a Japanese hit, and elsewhere it's being designated Chinese, Vietnamese, and all this. I think, yeah, there are questions about the limitations of the specific calculators.
Okay, so real quick, so in your mind, it's preposterous. Hold on, I got some notes in the background. Give me 2 seconds. Ibri, take the floor real quick.
Yeah, but with the discussion between Shari and Salam, the discussion isn't supposed to be about Israelites, like trying to prove that you're an Israelite using Gedmatch, because really, what Shari wants, what the real discussion is about, is dealing with how to use the calculators, and you know, which calculators to use, which ones not to use. So I just want to clarify that as well, because we're not talking about the Israelites as of yet.
Understood. Okay.
Yeah. And so hopefully during that discussion, that's what we stick on the the topic, and not go into Israelites.
Oh, yeah, but so where's the discussion supposed to take place?
Clubhouse. We wanted to do it on Genesis 49ers so that we can show slides and show everybody's information, but she didn't want to do that, so you know, we chose you know, Clubhouse, and I'll be a mod during that discussion, and I think Sean would also be a mod during that discussion as well, and possibly James.
Wow, that should be very interesting. So real quick, so Abu, you were talking about this concept of being 30+% Natufian, and so in your mind, that's preposterous. Did I catch that right, or no?
Well, I mean, I would say it can't be taken too literally. Like, so for example, like if it said I was, you know, I don't know, 25% Filipino or something like that, right? You could understand that. You'd say, okay, you know, he has a grandparent from the Philippines. But the thing is, when it says 34% Natufian, like if we take that too literally, right, it would imply, like, how would I get 34% of anything? Like, let's say I got 34% Moroccan or something, which I'm not. But, you know, if you, it would seem to imply that maybe one of my grandparents was a pure blood Natufian, and then like one of my other grandparents was, I don't know, like a quarter or something like that. And so the idea of like the pure blood Natufian somehow, you know, only associating with other Natufians across the millennia and winding up in the 20th century, you know, that's where it becomes hard to take seriously. So what I was trying to convey is not to take it too
right.
It has to be interpreted as meaning that it has that particular, I forget the name of that particular calculator, but it has to be interpreted as meaning that they have a limited number of places to place your admixture. And so since it has to go somewhere,
right,
you know? And at this point, I've concluded now, I was telling this to Ivry on Clubhouse, I think a month ago or something like that. Now I've gotten to test some of my other family members, both on my father's side and my mother's side. And now I'm wondering if it's like my European side is setting it off. Like I just assumed, you know, because some of my family's from North Africa, that must be what's setting it off. But now I think it's my mother's side of the family that's setting it off, or at least to a certain degree. And then that begs the question of, like, you know, what sort of, you know, European admixture triggers a higher Natufian rating?
Yeah. So how does the Natufian percentage match up to how Moroccan you are, how North African you are? Like, what's the difference there?
Well, keep in mind, my actual Moroccan ancestry is limited. So what happened is that my father was born here. His father was born in the Philippines. And then the family legend is that his father, so my great-grandfather, was from Morocco and then was a Muslim, went to the Philippines. So, I mean, what would that be? That'd be like 15% Moroccan or something like that, right? So even if like the Moroccan could set it off entirely, you know, it wouldn't be 34%, you know?
Yeah.
What happened recently is I've got to see some of the DNA of people on my mother's side of the family, right? So full disclosure, prior to this year, I've never met anyone from my mother's family, and she herself didn't know her parents. So now I'm in contact with like her uncle, excuse me, her brother, my uncle, and so on. And the fascinating things, these people are gingers. You know, my mother's family came out of Europe. They're gingers. They have red hair and pale skin. But based on, you know, it seems, assuming, you know, her brother, it's funny, similar to your story, it seems that my mother's father was an E carrier. Her brother has a EL29. Dante's haplogroup. But this guy, he's a ginger, though, you know? And so I wonder if he's getting it off, you know?
Hold on. Repeat that one for the people.
That's similar to your story, you know, like you know, that you said you have it's your mother's side of the family. There's men on the mother's side of your family, like your uncle, who has a subclade of E1B1B.
Yep.
And it's there's men related to my mother, like her brother has EL29, which is Dante's haplogroup. But this guy is a ginger. Like imagine something like like Ron Howard or something like that, you know?
Yeah. Wow. So that would oh wow. So
it shows how you can't. You know what's funny about it is that.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, for me, this is what's funny is that so you have this very like European side of my family, and then you have the other side of my family that comes out of North Africa, right? And if before we had tested everybody, if you told me one side is going to have not just an R clade, but a specifically like Northern European R clade, RP311, and then the other side is going to be E carriers, I would say, oh, well, obviously the North African side has to be where the E haplogroup is, and these gingers are going to be the ones carrying R, but it's reversed, you know. I don't know. To me, that's fascinating.
Yeah,
and it's a testament to how you can't determine these things not only by morphology but also by geography. You can't figure that out. You know, in modern times. I mean.
Oh man,
this is specifically the reason why we at Yaaap Gang we don't phenotype, because you can't go off a phenotype. You can't.
So for the people who are familiar with this channel and familiar with the conversations with Tell Ministries and also with the Boo on this concept, like this actually ties right into like one of the models they were using, or the question that Boo put out there in terms of like, well, when is somebody not a descendant of Abraham, instead going down the patrilineal descent and whatnot, based upon phenotype. And wow, you're saying the same haplogroup as Dante.
Mm-hmm. And we're talking about someone who's very much a ginger, you know, like pale skin, orange hair, essentially red hair to the point of being orange. Yeah.
But now that does make sense though, to where like if so on your mother's side and your father's side, like if like let's say 15% Moroccan and whatever percentage from your mother's side, like that could add up to the 34% Natufian.
Right, but that's what would signify that that there is it's certain European markers are also setting off that Natufian thing.
It may be the E1B1B. Seeing as Natufian scared E1B1B.
Indeed, but I think it's. I mean, I think the relevant calculator is doing sort of it's more within an autosomal spectrum, you know. So, but yeah, I don't know. It's interesting.
You should take illustrative DNA. Sorry if it sounds like
I can hear you fine. Yeah,
okay.
I wanted to ask you some of the tools you were using. I saw recently you had mentioned some interesting ones I had never heard of. You have to pay for that illustrative?
Yes, and it's not expensive from what I remember.
Okay.
I think it's like $20, but you should get illustrative DNA because it can give you DNA coordinates, and also it has just a regular platform where it can show you your DNA breakdown. And with illustrative DNA, I found out that I had I'm just going to go ahead and say it, 13% Ibero-Mauritian DNA, 13.4%, I believe. And that Ibero-Mauritian DNA is also connected to it said in the chart, it's connected to also like Natufian like DNA as well. I might pull it up here in a minute. I'll see. But I would like for you to take that, Abu, to see how much Ibero-Mauritian, or they call it Neolithic North African DNA. That'll be interesting.
I'll check that out.
Because
I see my Gedmatch Oracle results. Emphasis on Oracle. You know.
Yes, this is yours right here.
Yeah, those are different Oracle results using different calculators in Oracle.
I had to bring this one up with Ibri here, so Ibri could see your 6th or your 17th placing on the middle.
Hey, he's a brother.
What do you see there? I don't know what you see. What's this?
It says Fulani, a distance of 63.74.
Ah, yeah. Well, something I remember the context that we brought this up in was that when you get numbers that high, it's fair to be skeptical. Like, for example, some of these calculators. Now, I don't have any Italian ancestry, but on some of these calculators, I was hitting Italian and I was getting like, a distance of 12. And so if it's possible to have no Italian admixture, like obviously the way I would assume I'm hitting Italian is because, I have some North African ancestry and then I have a lot of European ancestry, and presumably their Italian samples have a similar admixture, right? A little bit of North African ancestry and a lot of European ancestry. So, but the point was, if a person who doesn't have any actual Italian ancestry can hit, Italian on a bunch of different calculators at a distance of like 12 or 13 or whatever it was. I haven't looked at my Gedmatch results in months, but that would be grounds for being to take a something that has a distance of like 60 with a grain of salt or a fistful of salt.
Yeah, I think you're talking about your dog cat results.
Perhaps, yeah. It's been months. I haven't really looked at them since August when we had that discustion. Yeah. Oh, yeah. There you go. Yeah, Tuscan, North of Tuscan. Yeah, look at that. Less than 10 for Tuscan. Oh well.
But this is the Docat Africa 9, right? Like, so it's got to put your stuff somewhere, right?
Yeah, which is the case with all of these. That it has to put it somewhere. And actually, I'm glad we're bringing this up, because another thing, and I hope this comes up in your discussion that you have with Salam, is that people do need to distinguish when using Gedmatch. They need to distinguish with what I would call the 2 layers of Gedmatch, where you get the first set of results, and then when you jump into Oracle beyond that, because I do think those should be treated differently. That sort of first layer, and then the Oracle results, which might be considered like the second layer down.
Shari, you can probably tell everybody when that discussion is, so that's what we can go to
it. Shalom, fam. Team. Yeah, so it's gonna be on the 22nd on Clubhouse. I forget exactly which time, but I know it's around 7-8 CST because she's Central. And I'll be sure to double check with her on that too again. But I also have the replay on Clubhouse of us talking about having this discussion. So it's gonna be on the 22nd on Clubhouse. Avery and Sean are moderators for this discussion.
So real quick, sis, can you tell people what your position is in terms of what you'll be talking about?
Well, my position is that you can use any of the admixture heritage tools to determine which modern populations you share ancestry with, and who could possibly be along your genealogy. And that it's not, because it's based off of autosomal results, it is not suitable for tracing ancient ancestry unless you're using a specific calculator for ancient ancestry. But that's pretty much my position. And also to be careful of proxy populations. Like, for example, what Abu was talking about with his North Italian. That could possibly be a proxy that they're just throwing your similar European ancestry into that, and it's coming up in your distance.
And it's not about Israelites, correct? The debate has nothing to do with. Okay.
No, not at all.
So that's whose DNA was that?
I'm looking at mine right now.
Okay.
So yeah, mine's super. I got the type on this super small, but yeah, like so. Something like I really want, whenever the conversation goes to the Israelite conversation, something I definitely want to be able to put on the table is the understanding of the slave trade. Because so in this, I pull up, like, so in Salam's position, I'm not supposed to pull up Ethiopian Jewish in the Ethio Helix period. And so something I was trying to explain to her and Jacob Israel on Facebook. Shout out to Jacob. Was the fact that so my mother, my mother is North African, like Abu is partially. My mother's also partially North African, etc. Her father is EM34. Again, she comes up 30+% Natufian, just like, so her DNA and Abu's DNA and Gedmatch look very similar. Like they could be brother and sister, whatnot, right? Very, very similar.
I remember when you were showing the comparison. Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah. So again, just like Abu, she comes up in Ethiopian Jewish in all the Ethiohelix models and whatnot. But so do I. But I come in at a closer distance than my mother, which means that my father would be a closer distance than me. And so I say that, and I point to the fact, like, so people like me and Shari and I and other people of West African descent in the Americas and whatnot. Also, when we do our DNA test, we also find that sometimes we have East African DNA or DNA from the Horn, etc. Like that's how I met Shari, was the fact that she's like, oh man, let's look at the Gedmatch and compare this stuff and whatnot. We were looking at the fact that she had a Somalian DNA, etc. That I had in my family tree DNA test, I had the DNA from Eritrea, Ethiopia, and in Somalia there as well. And again, like I had like less than 2%. I believe the sister had like 3%, right? Which is not a small percentage when you're looking at autosomal DNA. So it spurred me to look towards also with people like Cohen Hamadishe from the Lemba tribe, telling me that he believed that Lemba were taken on slave ships. That had me looking into the East African slave trade, making it into the transatlantic slave trade, and finding out that the actual numbers for that were 542,000 slaves coming from the ports of Mozambique and Madagascar. So not that like every time that you're going to see Ethiopian Jewish popping up in Ethiohelix or anywhere in Gedmatch is going to be that, like Abu's talking about. However, we can't negate the fact that there is a decent sized population of people that went into the slave trade that did have East African genetics, and that we should see that fingerprint on some people in the Americas,
including the haplogroups. Like
that's
why Dante came up in our discussion last August.
Yeah, which is super interesting because again, when you look at his DNA, I believe he's like really, really Nigerian, and I believe that when it came back to he got an update at one point. I believe it said that like that Nigerian was all Igbo, and so it seems like one of his parents would be like, it's like if you're 47% Nigerian, it seems to me one of your parents is Nigerian, right? And so
two of them are.
Yeah, something like that, right? So at that juncture, it seems like okay. Well, let's say his father is like of West African descent, right? That's super interesting, right? Because now we're looking at the EL29 coming out of West Africa, which is very possible. Or again, it could be emblematic of someone coming from East Africa. He could be descendant of a Lemba, or said like someone from East Africa, right? But we also got to ask the same question, like how did your mother's family member get the EL29, right? Like that, man. Yeah, that I was not expecting to hear that, Abu. You kind of got
I
me.
wasn't expecting it either, so I was surprised. I thought of you because I remember you said the same thing.
Yeah. No. I'm interrupting you. Go ahead. You got it.
No, it's just that. Yeah, it surprised me as well. The other thing that also surprised me is, you remember from our discussions, when I take these DNA tests, one thing that I get is this small bit of like Omotic, small bit of East African DNA. And I just assumed, I have family that comes out of North Africa. It must be coming from there. So I got to see the results of some of my cousins, on my father's side, and it's 0 on that, which again implies, it's coming from my mother's side of the family, which is a surprise. These West European gingers are.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, I don't know.
That's very much like me too, because I can't rule out that on my family tree that the Ethiopian Jewish or the Ethiopian DNA and the horn DNA comes from my mom and whatnot, right? So it's very possible that. Wow. Okay. So we're getting put through the same genetic ringer. That's hilarious.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
What's your MT?
It's a U2B2, if I recall correctly, which is like some. When I looked it up I recall it being associated. It's some sort of subclade that's like associated with West India, And I mean, India, like Gujarat or something like that. I think that's what it was, U2B2. which we discussed that last August as well. You know, the speculation that surprised me as well. The speculation that I came up for that one was, you know, I tried to imagine a scenario where, like, let's say 500 years ago, you have some girl in India who marries a guy who takes her into what's now Afghanistan, and then, you know, she has a daughter, and, you know, some guy takes her into like what's now Tajikistan, and so over the generations they just keep moving west until they wind up somewhere in Western Europe as a gender, you know, red hair.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, I affectionately called your mom a ginger gypsy because
Yes. Yeah, in the with the Yashub and these guys, they have that Genesis 49ers resource page on Facebook, and Rudy Heinrich, he recently posted a thing about gypsy DNA, the Roma DNA, and I was hoping to get some sort of because I love the Roma and Sinti. I always have my whole life, so I certainly love the idea of you know, having some sort of distant connection to them. But he posted an article about the various haplogroups found amongst them, and woo, no justification there. They don't. None of them had subclades of U2 on their maternal side. So much for that. But I was holding out hope that I could pull some connection there.
Yeah, Rudy be dropping some really good sources in the Genesis resource page.
Sorry, family. I had to go run get my power cord. My joint's about to die.
I see there's some. I'm looking in the live chat. I noticed there's some.
Yeah, some very interesting
Some
conversations.
questions about the gentleman Malakban Abhadiam. I think he asked a question about Noah's DNA, and it looks like he posed it to Yashub.
Hold on, let me find it right quick.
Maybe.
Well, I mean,
it
to
might need
answer
the
that
link.
quickly, you know, I mean, I'm not taking a position on this, but since he was asking Yashub, if Yashub can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that his position would be that Noah was essentially the Y chromosomal atom. So presumably Noah's paternal haplogroup would be something like A, or, you know, a precursor to A00, I think he called it, or something like that. But of course, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Yeah. So when it comes to Noah, excuse me. When it comes to Noah and his sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and you can probably put the link in as well because Yashub can explain his stance. Because my stance, our stances are pretty similar, but they might differ just a little bit. But like for me, for instance, I would say that pre-flood man probably didn't have mutations. I believe pre-flood man would have been pretty pure. And also, by the way, I believe in a global flood and everything. So when that old world was destroyed, new things began to appear with the humans after Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and that's when you begin to get genetic mutations. And I go with Dr. Nathaniel Jensen's model when it comes to the three ancestral nodes. When it comes to the three wives of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, I believe the same thing exists for the male side of things. So, of course, Ham would be haplogroup A and B, Shem, D, E, and Japheth CF. And there's a couple of different, methods you can go with this. You can say that Shem, Ham, and Japheth had these mutations of haplogroup A, B, Shem, D, E, and Japheth CF. Or you can say that these mutations appeared over time, especially if you go with an older Earth. That this population of humans that would represent the ancestors of, or the descendants of Shem, this population of humans that would represent the descendants of Ham, or this population of descendants that represent the descendants of Japheth, would have these haplogroups. Like, there's a couple of different methods and ways you can kind of do this. But I can also let Yashub explain his stance. I have like two different models when it comes to that.
And to correspond with that, the descendants of Japheth, some of the studies point to maternal haplogroup M and N with the spread of Indo-European languages, and specifically haplogroup R, mtDNA haplogroup U descends from that population, within that population. So in my model, my maternal model, those would be maternal Japhites.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'm glad to. I've been curious about the positions you guys take on maternal haplogroups. I know it ultimately doesn't have major relevance to a patrilineal definition, but of any particular line. But I was curious about that because I've noticed the Natufians had interesting maternal haplogroups. Like I think N comes up amongst them, and so forth. The Natufian samples that they had.
Correct. And I believe there's a M in there too. L3 is there, which is my haplogroup.
Interesting. I didn't know that. I gotta.
Yeah.
So another question from Malak is, please tell me what's Abraham's DNA, etc. Y'all can read it from there because Ishmael's, Ishmaelites, and Edomites are his sons. Can you please give an answer?
Yeah, so I believe that Abraham would have haplogroup E because, like I said in my model, I believe Shem is haplogroup DE, and I believe Abraham would come from the E strain. And there's a couple of different models you can go with Abraham. You can say Abraham was E-P2. You could say Abraham was E1B1B. You can say Abraham was E-M123, E-M35, E-M34, even EV12 or EV22. There's so many different models you can use for Abraham when it comes to which subclade of haplogroup E he could be, or if he could just be E1B itself, because we still have people to this day who end up having E1B. But there's quite a few different E clades that Abraham could have been. Not going to lie on that. It's definitely a lot.
On that note, Sister Shari and I, do you have any models as of yet for what Sarah would have been?
Yes, I would place Sarah under L3, considering in my model, well, either L2 or L3, because in my model, L2 and L3 are Afro-Asiatic. As of now, L2 still iffy on that, but for sure L3, because there are papers that specifically name L3 as the Afro-Asiatic super parahaploid. And then amongst, like, let's say a lot of Semitic speakers in East Africa, a lot of Yemen, Oman, Saudi Arabia, and small bits and pieces of Iraq and Iran, you find L3, you find L2, and then subclades of L3, L4, L5, etc. in these regions, which can corroborate with the spread and migration out of Africa through the southern tip of Arabian Peninsula and towards the Harappa civilization and culture.
That's what's up. What's your position on M right now?
On who? N?
M as in mother.
M is Japhet, maternal Japhet. Because you find lots of M and N in ancient areas where the supposed Proto-Indo-European speakers and cultures were these ancient samples of their, like, for example, I have my map up here real quick. For example, M1. Oh, I'm being called. Dinner with the fam. Gotta hit a boo real quick. 1 second.
No, that's right.
I couldn't tell if he's really saying that like he's eating with his family or if that's just the joke on me from the past. But I really was eating with my family, you know.
Right.
Yeah, that's the ongoing joke.
My bad. My
Every
steak
time we
is-
have a conversation, you and your family always out eating.
My steak is ready, so I do have to go.
That's right. Grass-fed steak in the building. So moving forward,
You know, looking into, because earlier we were talking about that East African gene flow that we see in some people like yourself, Orthodox Moor, and Shari, and even myself as well. But I think we should also start looking into North Africa, parts of North Africa, when it comes to the transatlantic slave trade. Because y'all see, all of Yaaap gang knows about my DNA when it comes to my very close North African connections. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but I think looking into slaves coming from parts of I don't know, maybe Morocco or Mauritania, places like that, Algeria, you know, looking into that would be pretty interesting.
How you just gonna leave out Abu from East Africa and North Africa like that? You know what I'm
Oh,
saying?
my bad. And also Abu. I forgot. I forgot about
Like
everybody on the
EL25 or EL29 is found in
My mother's side, though. That's my mother's side. My
Oh,
actual,
really, bro? I'm
my
just
actual Moroccan family was apparently R carriers, so you know.
autosomal,
Throw your hands up on that.
you know what I'm saying? Even though there's a lot of Israelites who are jealous about Abu's Ethio-Helix numbers, though, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's there was an interesting exchange that we had. I can't remember the month now, but when I was briefly on with Teo twins on Berean, and then you had a discussion with him subsequently on Facebook. And I remember he had taken the position initially that, you know, if you get Ethiopian Jewish in your oracle results, then that demonstrates that you descend patrilineally from Jacob. And so when you finally pressed him on the fact that, you know, I was able to get those hits, you know, and yet here it is, I'm an R carrier. And he was like, oh, well, maybe he's an Edomite, you know? And I was like, well, that's interesting, you know, because you start talking about R carrying Edomites, you're opening the door to British Israelism or something like that, you know?
You didn't just get the hits, though. You got the hits at a closer distance than they do.
Right? Yeah.
And that's the thing there, right? Like, so that's why you got to be an Edomite, because either you're an Edomite or you're a whole Ethiopian Jew. And oh, wow. If Abu's an Ethiopian Jew in this piece, jeez,
game over.
Yeah. Shout out to the Iceman Israelites. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, so but real quick, what's your position on the East African gene flow in the transatlantic slave trade?
Well, I mean, I you've brought out a number of points on that already, so I take it for granted that was happening, you know, and I do think it's hard to it's hard to say where that you know, how we can point to what is evidence of that and what's not, but I do take it for granted that it happened, you know. And I think, you know, I know Dante doesn't like me bringing him up, so I hope he'll forgive me for bringing him up, but I do think someone like Dante is a clear example of that, potentially. Some, you know, of course, there's other people who say, well, how do you know he didn't get his EL29 from a European source or something like that? It shows how complex this can be, you know? Yeah,
particularly if your mother's family member is coming up with that in Western Europe, you know what I'm saying? That's and your mom having you, it really just shows migration, right? And so that like migration really shows why you asked that question about, like, okay, so how mixed do you have to be, or what how many generations? Like the whole question you put the tail on them, right, was like, so if you're going so many generations down and they don't look like this, but they don't have the same phenotype, but they have the same genetics, why are they not the same? Why are they not considered X, Y, and Z, right?
Especially since at the time I was asking that question, they were still claiming to hold to a patrilineal definition of Israelite. It was from the point after our exchange on Berean where they finally jettisoned that and treated it as irrelevant. But before that, like, for example, when they appeared on your show, after I had done that show with Vocab on genetics, you had a show with them. And they were still very much affirming a patrilineal definition. And then it was only afterwards that they jettisoned that when they saw it. It wasn't tenable to what they were proposing.
And so your question becomes even more reasonable. Like, so, okay, like, so you're saying that in your family, it's a ginger with EL29, right? Like, so with Dante, he's somebody who's very dark skinned who has EL29, right? And so in my family, again, my grandfather's Mediterranean looking, right? And again, it's the same family line of E1B1B, right? So they all share paternal lineage somewhere, right?
And throwing Einstein there as well.
Yeah.
By the way, that also relates to how I remember you had a discussion, I believe, with Ngozi, and the question came up, well, you know, like you could say, well, Dante descends paternally from an East African population, and someone will say, well, how do you know he didn't get EL29 from a European population? And I remember I commented on your video and said, these aren't something important to keep in mind. These aren't mutually exclusive options. You know,
Yeah.
it could be both. You could have a situation where, let's say, and again, if Dante winds up listening to this or hearing about it, I hope he forgives me. I'm not trying to say any of this disrespectfully. It's just offering a hypothetical. Hypothetically speaking, let's say we magically were able to get photographs of, you know, all his paternal ancestors going back 30 generations. You could have a situation where 12 generations back, you get someone looking like Einstein, and then you go another 12 generations back and you have someone who has a look that has a morphology that's stereotypical of Ethiopia, you know? Like it's not an either or thing. It's not, you know, they're not mutually exclusive options. It can be both.
Yeah. Like, so on top of having, like, so like, again, on my mother and my uncle, they both have, like, so something just came out on Ancestry, which is fantastic, ancestry.com, with their DNA. Now you can see what DNA you got from your mom and your dad, right? And so it's literally confirming something that 23andMe told me about my uncle's genetics, which is that from my mom, I get Southeast African genetics, right? And I also get genetics from Senegal and from Nigeria, and whatnot, right? And so it's very possible, again, like, so my grandfather having EM34 could very, very well have descended from like a Yemenite Ethiopian population that went that went through Africa and went to North Africa, ended up in Spain, eventually ended up in the Americas, etc. And here I am, right? He could have started off looking like somebody who was Afro-Asiatic in terms of like going back to his original lineage and whatnot, and then ends up looking Mediterranean by the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like it
easily.
But your parental lineage does not change just because of phenotype. It is what it is. And so what I love about genetics is when you get into DNA and genetics, it erases racism right off rip. Like if you take it seriously, it just erases racism. Do y'all want to speak to that at all? Or
yeah, like just going into phenotype and how haplogroups really show the truth when it comes to paternal ancestry. The limba as an example, and a lot of people like to use Gedmatch and stuff to connect themselves to the limba, but when it comes to the limba, the only reason they're considered to be descendants of Middle Eastern populations is because of the J marker. Yet the limba speak a Bantu language and they phenotypically look Bantu, but they have haplogroup J. Now, of course, they have other haplogroups like T and E1B1A and E1B1B, but just focusing on J, they look no different than, let's say, a Zulu, but they got that J marker. Same thing with the Ethiopian Jews. I know a lot of us tend to use the Ethiopian as a reference of connecting to Israelites, and I don't think that's wrong. If you have Ethiopian Jewish connections, then go ahead and use it. But I think what people also tend to forget is that Beta Israel has a lot of haplogroup A among them. I think they have like close to 40% haplogroup A, yet they look like other East African populations, who most people assume are mixed. Beta Israel with that A marker, and A is connected to people like Nilots, like the darkest, tallest people on the planet, as well as people like Khoisanes who have Asiatic features. So yeah, haplogroups, they really do show very interesting things in terms of phenotype.
Yes, sir. On that note, family. Well, real quick, I want to ask, go around the horn real quick. Is there any topic on genetics y'all want to touch on that we haven't touched on real quick?
I don't know if there's. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying I'm here for the ride. I don't have any questions, but I'll answer questions.
No, that's right. Go ahead, Abu.
I remember when we had the discussion back in August, there was something that I had intended to say, and I wound up not, forgetting to say it, and then I wound up leaving it in a comment on your video of our discussion, and that is, I don't know how long we would spend discussing it now, but I do think, and I think a lot of people miss this, is that when you're attempting to reconcile the biblical text with the human phylogenetic tree, an absolutely central question is whether or not someone holds to a global flood model or a local flood model. And I'm not going to force people to take a position on that, but I do think that without considering that question, that's an interesting thing what Yashub just suggested. I do think that's something that a lot of people miss out on. Like they'll ask a question and then the model depends even on that, because you can come up with drastically different possibilities. As we've discussed before, I think I briefly discussed this with Ivory on Clubhouse. For people who want to make a case for J, it's at least possible on a local flood model, but it seems a lot less likely. It seems impossible almost. I mean, who knows? Maybe I'm missing something, but it seems impossible on a global flood model. While on a local flood model, E works just as well, and it seems to work just as well on a global model as well. So the models make a difference in terms of flood models, even make a huge difference in how people interpret data and how they can attempt to assess probabilities, So that's a big one. By the way, forgive me for segueing, but since Yashub brought up that question that's on the screen now, something I've been thinking about just this week, I forget where it was. I was reading something about a guy in Morocco, right, relevant to Morocco, who came up with an I haplogroup, right? And if I'm not, there's one of the Christian apologists also has I, if I'm not mistaken, an African-American Christian apologist. And also, if I read somewhere online that Nas, the rapper Nas, has that as well. But thinking about a guy in Morocco having that haplogroup, I wonder if you see someone with a haplogroup that seems just plainly European, I don't think it's necessarily gained from this is going to be controversial because I don't have the data to back this up in terms of, but I do wonder if it's already in Morocco, can it go further south? Do you necessarily get it from somebody, in the 15th, 16th century, or could it predate something like that, for people with that haplogroup who are part of the West African diaspora? I mean,
yeah, because you find G in Morocco, you find a whole bunch of stuff in Morocco, right? Which makes a lot of sense because you have a lot of genetic infusion in Morocco from a lot of different areas. So, for instance, there's people in Morocco who legit do come up with Italian DNA sometimes, right? Yeah, that's a great question because, like, let's say you have one of the, and this is where like haplogroups are important because you can trace specifically what type of eye someone has, right? Like, so I would suspect like the eye came through with the Visigoths, right?
That's exactly what I was thinking. I mean, that's how I even imagine my own haplogroup, because it's not just R, it's RP311, which is apparently associated with like Northwestern Europe, so something like England. So I imagine that something like that, like the Visigoths winding up in Spain, some of their descendants perhaps converting to Islam, and then with the with the Reconquista, some of them wind up and then in North Africa.
Also, don't forget the Vikings as well, because they also made it to the Mediterranean, even into Persia.
Which even touches on Abu's point there, because I was going to touch on the trade routes. Like, so you have trade routes going from Morocco down south into Timbuktu and then to parts of West Africa, etc., and also going over into like Egypt and other parts of North Africa that also touched all the way up to Baghdad, etc., right? So yeah, like there could be genetic infusion of European DNA through those trade routes into West Africa, which we already kind of see some kind of evidence with like the back migration of R, right? With the R1 V88, etc. So yeah, that's a very interesting thought to think about, right? And on top of that, like, so you have populations to where like you have for instance, you have the Sephardic Jews that are in that go to West Africa, and in the genetic testing, you see R amongst them, right? You see E1B1B amongst them. You see other haplogroups amongst them that would be considered European and whatnot. And
even amongst the Remba, the Zimbabwean Lemba, they have R, although apparently the South African Lemba don't. But the Remba have it, which is interesting, and in a significant degree. I don't remember the precise percentage, but it was to a significant degree. Like, I'm just throwing a number out there, like maybe 15%, 20%, something big, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, some of me had like F. Like, I was like, yo, like there's like 14 different haplogroups amongst them. You know what I'm saying? Shout out to the mixed multitude for real. But at the end of the day, that's what I like about this genetic thing is it really shows the concept of the mixed multitude, because that's what we are. Like as a human population, we're a mixed multitude of people. In a biblical sense, it's the same concept, and it's a really beautiful thing to look at. And that's why I'm saying it makes racism like disappear if you're an honest individual looking at the information.
Not only that, I would say with Jewish populations, it also is a testament to the layers of conversions, the trickles and the mass conversions, and how they can pile up and make a population diverse. And how I was given this analogy on Facebook, like let's say with Ashkenazi Jews, you have let's say we start with the Khazar conversion, right? Mm-hmm. Some of the Khazars convert, then you suddenly have an enclave, you have a place where it's safe for Jews. So Jews then who are not descendants of Khazars move to that Khazar territory because it's a Jewish friendly place. And those people who are moving there, some of them could be patrilineal descendants of Jacob, and some of them could be the descendants of people who converted long ago. And then so now you have this more mixed population, a mix of patrilineal descendants of Jacob, patrilineal descendants of pre-Khazar converts, and then patrilineal descendants of Khazar converts. And then they move, as the Khazar Empire collapses, they start moving west, and they pick up more converts along the way. And I was drawing a parallel with what I suspect might be a plausible model for the Lemba. You could have a situation where under Dhul Nuwas, you get the conversion of the Himyari kingdom, and so that creates a Jewish-friendly enclave. So Jews who were already Jews before they obviously, I would assume they facilitated that conversion, but then Jews who were Jews before the conversion under Dhul Nuwas then moved to that enclave. So similar to the Khazar situation, you get a situation where you have patrilineal descendants of Jacob, patrilineal descendants of pre-Himyari converts, and then a patrilineal descendants of Himyari converts, and then the Himyari kingdom collapses under the attack of the Ethiopians, and now they spread outward, and some of them head into Africa and start going south, and they pick up more converts. And I think that's probably the Lemba story, that you probably have this spectrum of descendants of Jacob, descendants of converts from long, long ago, descendants of Himyari converts, and then converts they picked up in Africa, as they move south along the eastern coast of the continent. That's the assumption I would have, and I see a parallel there,
Yeah, and I'm going to use that to segue into a whole nother side of this conversation. But real quick, I'm going to play a clip from Vocab talking about the difference between people who use Deuteronomy 28 and people using 23.
I like the way this feel, yeah. Let my soul cry, yeah. Minister, we gonna speak from the heart on this one. I'm performing lyrical funerals, no obituary. I killed your boy and brought him back to life, pet cemetery. My anointing not based on attendance at a seminary. Scarlet witches, they attracted to the visionary. Everywhere I go, I bring the word with me, missionary. Soldier drafted in the war machine, military. Pay attention, what I'm saying to you, legendary. You got the demeanor of a front desk secretary. That mean you take the calls, but you don't make the calls. That's why you hate, cause ain't nothing fake about me at all. Now I dare you try to say that with a straight face. My delivery in tip-top great shape. I'm too advanced for you, light years, space age. No evolution for you cavemen, stone age. I'm a thoroughbred, rock solid. I came from the bottom to the top, rock climbing. I grew up in the hood, pros and cons. That's that full court pressure when the ambulance roll out the stretch. Why can't you see it's not logical? And you live diabolical. Boy, your point of view smaller than the hair follicle molecule. This for all of them that follow you, smoking all of them barbecue. When I pull up, your voice don't correct itself with no auto-tune. I got a whole nother level that I can enter whenever I gotta deal with the devil. I pick a whole nother method. I hear a whole lot of yapping. They wanna see my reaction. Really out here in the community making it happen. I don't really think they understand the dilemma. They ain't looking at the man in the mirror. I can't say it any clearer. The plan is very simple. It's time to start playing in the temple. Before somebody come and put the can on your temple. Reaching like a baby with his hand for the nipple. The Grand Reaper coming with his hand on the sickle. In the van coming with a ram with the van coming get him. I am so glad that I changed up. Made it out of where I came from. Watch for the sliding hook or the slow ball, fastball, and their change up. That ghetto lifestyle, it changed us. Go back to visit, it ain't changed much. Only difference is now the way that my brain process information. And Satan, but after my license, day one, let me say something. Only reason that I'm still alive today because God's grace is amazing. Just another raisin in the sun. Dream deferred when things occurred. Now you getting served right on the curb like a lemonade stand. I just gave you the benediction, let the whole church say amen.